Welcome to the Alex and Kagen podcast, where we're on a journey to find our
True
north.
This is the North.
Hey guys, welcome to our first ever, like many people are doing now, virtual, remote podcast slash video. I'm saying that like it's some kind of new technology, which it's not. we haven't been using it, and actually surprisingly, in work settings, for me at least, different various organizations and my school, they haven't been using it either. So it's like it's been here. Like we've had FaceTime and Skype and all these things for a long time, but now getting like all of society mobilized into these platforms has been kind of humorous to watch, and then created all new avenues for trolls, as we've seen in the news. So yeah, here we are. We knew that we couldn't launch into a new podcast without, of course, doing things differently and addressing. We had some content actually that I was queuing up, but it just, everything now is a before and after situation. So all that stuff before feels really irrelevant. So we want to just address COVID-19, coronavirus, the Rona, whatever you call it, from our point of view as just regular Joes who also dabble in entrepreneurship. Kagan much more than I do. I think for me, actually, in my process, I've gone more of the kind of consulting route. I've actually been fortunate in that my work is already remote. I do a lot of digital marketing, and as I've gotten more expert at Zoom, I've actually ended up with more and more sort of like work on the side to help people do this. In fact, two different sources aside from my main job. So we'll talk about this as we go. So for some of us, there have been opportunities, and I would actually probably say for most of us, it's been devastating, and that's not going over our heads. So we're going to just tackle it head on.
Yeah, I would like to add too. It's crazy. It blows me away. I have a few people at work that come up and like, hey, haven't heard a podcast for a while, and I'm like, oh, you're listening? Anyway, I want to.
Have you talked to my mom? How did you even know it existed?
You know my mother?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I first off, I want to say thanks for doing this with us. This is a lot of fun for Alex and I. For me, this is a great time to connect with my brother, and I really enjoy doing it. But I want to ask you guys if there's anybody that is listening that is brave enough to talk to us and let us know what do you guys want us to talk about? Who do you want us to talk to? We've talked about potentially bringing some people in. We do actually know some people that know a lot more than we know, and they may be willing to play with us if you guys want to hear about it. So what are some of the things you would like us to talk about? Do you want us to talk about business? Would you rather us talk about film? Alex is great at film. There's a lot of different ways we can go with this, and I'd be curious to see with the people that are listening to us, what do you want us to talk about, or do you just want us to keep talking about what's happening in the here and now, which is kind of what we're doing, right? Like the last time we talked, I think, or the last podcast we had, we were like, we're buying all the vineyards and we're going to do everything. And now, everything's changed. And so now we're talking about the here and now where we're at. So I'd just be curious as to, what people would like us to talk about.
Kind of starting by addressing coronavirus, just, I think, making a note, like, obviously this is happening, and we knew we couldn't put out a new episode or something without sort of addressing this and trying to address it in a way that we can. Like, how does this affect a regular person? And how does this affect small business in a local community? And then I thought we could at some point talk about it. It actually does seem like big name people mentioned it and then just moved on and are acting like it's not changing things. But I think the only problem there is that this is a big thing that is like gonna affect society for a long time. So maybe just kind of pointing out, like, we see that as, I don't know, there's right now is more than just hustle and grind and you'll get through it. there's so many people, like, it doesn't matter how hard they hustle or grind right now, they're just in a bad place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so much more emotional right now because it affects everybody on such a great level.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I've noticed at our shop, even though the hours are shortened, we're only open half the day. I am way more wore out at the end of the day than I was when I was working these 15-hour days, and a lot of it has to do with it's the emotional toll. It's the anxiety and the stress of what's going on, and then every single person that comes in wants to ask you how you're doing, and they want to go over it, and it's just a constant emotional drain. And I don't think that's wrong, but I definitely think that this is a lot different than pulling up your bootstraps and working harder. This isn't one of those like hustle, grind, and work through it. I mean, it is a work through it moment, but definitely we have embodied the taking it a day at a time, because you can't, I just can't emotionally work through more than what's the day at hand. But that's the big question though, is because with every calamity, every big crazy thing that's going on, right? Like that's an opportunity for somebody. So how do you balance that? How do you balance the severity of the situation, but also try to be like, okay, I need to be forward thinking because this will get better. People will get better. Try to stay positive. And I think there's a lot to being positive. There's so much anxiety out there. I think that some of these guys like, Gary or Ed or whoever, I love the positivity, but there's this looming like, well, you're being so positive and not acknowledging what's happening. And where's that middle ground?
Yeah, and I understand too that like you can't. There's a frustration in how little you can do. Let's say you're one of these people who's really successful, big time brand, and you make millions. Like, what do you do? What do you do to help? You can probably do some charity oriented things, but one thing that won't help is just dwelling on it in your content. So I do understand that. Like they want to sort of be like, okay, we've acknowledged it. Now regular programming continues. That's what I think is actually a mistake though. We have already entered a world where regular programming is gone. And so that I think is the opportunity for everybody who has the internet, or everybody who has a smartphone is we can all be getting online and trying to do something online. So excuse me, that's not the Rona. I just swallowed my spit wrong. Yeah, so we can all like be on the internet and trying to do something here like what we're doing, or but I don't necessarily think that just anyone can jump online and start a business right now, for example, which is I feel like some of these guys are still preaching that kind of stuff, like, well, just keep going with the hustle. And yeah, I don't know, I really feel that there's a tension there. There's also a tension with, for those of us who are able to find opportunity or a new way to move through the world during this time, I can't help but feel a little bit of a sense of guilt. Like I'm seeing a lot of my friends just lose their jobs and lose all their opportunities like that. It's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, I'm not of the mind of like, oh, well, just learn something new and start a new career right now in the midst of chaos. Just because I think there's this other issue of so many people now are looking for something else, or looking for another way through, and it's not even there yet. It doesn't even exist yet. We're now creating it in the moment. And so I'm trying to bring it back to my main point. That changes everything. It's not just programming as usual. We're creating a whole new pathway. It's happening right now. We don't even know what it is yet. So that's where I think a lot of the mainstream brand name, do-it-yourself guys are I think missing the point of what's happening. And part of that might just be, if you're doing really well and you have lots of money, you're very cushioned. You can absorb the shock and almost not feel it. You could see it, but not really feel it. And we're at least still ground level enough. We're feeling it. We're definitely feeling it.
I was, and I'm not, I want to be very clear. I'm not knocking people who have done well and gotten to a position where they have the luxuries of life that they've worked for. Like, it doesn't bother me. I've read some stuff on Reddit and some different stuff where people are really bashing on celebrities or people with money because, they're sheltering in place, but they're sheltering in place and they have our own private gym and things like that. And it's like, well, whatever, right? Like they did what they did and they became successful. And I think being more self-focused in the sense of being content with the gifts and blessings that you have in the moment rather than worried about what everybody else has. But it is hard. This morning I was looking at following the stories of one of the families that I follow, and they were out on their private golf course this morning, shooting golf. And I'm just like, that's cool. I'm in my, 1,000-foot flat chilling, there's not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's hard. I think it's hard. I think one of the big things that I'm working on right now is not being so worried about the other guy and being more worried about where's my focus, where's my attitude. And, it's interesting. You were talking about, is it business as usual or what do you do? The thing that I keep wrestling with is, okay, maintain. You want to keep putting into the business that you started or whatever it is that you are working towards. And a lot of times in business, to be a good business person, right, you need to be able to make quick decisions now and pivot when you have to. The hardest thing for me lately has been every day is a new pivot. Like, it's not like, oh man, this week we did this and oh, this month we did this. It's like every day it's like making these huge decisions. Are we throwing all our food away? Are we going to try to come back tomorrow? Are we going to run this special? Are we going to take this food to these people? And then there's all the, because I have a restaurant. So the weird thing for me is, it's always going on in my head is, okay, well, do I make a bunch of food and do I take it to people? Because otherwise I'm going to throw it away. But is that also being part of the problem, right? Because I'm taking food to people. I'm at risk because I constantly see a lot of people every day. I'm touching money. Yes, we're washing our hands. Yes, we're wearing gloves. Yes, we're wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. But still, I see more people than the average person would, just because I'm in the front lines with people. That my business is people, right? That's what I'm trying to do. So there's that. And then, like you were talking about too, the guilt, right? Like, I really struggle because, thank God we are functioning. We're alive. Now, I missed all the people that I had to lay off, and they are going to come back as soon as I can bring them back. But I feel guilty because I'm watching friends of mine who have restaurants that are closing, and we hope they can reopen, but there's still all that uncertainty. And then I feel that guilt of, well, I know that even if I close tomorrow, I would have to be closed for 4 or 5 months before I would go out of business. I feel guilty about that, but also, should I? Because I've worked hard to get to that spot, and where's that balance?
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking with somebody actually today about the concept of carpetbagging, which to summarize, and my history may not be exactly right here, but it was when you essentially had these Northerners who were being sent to the South after the Civil War to sort of like help, reconstruct the South. And they, of course, were coming down with a lot more privilege. They had, I think typically they just, they had more wealth. And so they were able to essentially take advantage of people in the South. They could get ahead of opportunities and investments that a lot of the people down there at the time just didn't even have access to, but it was their own, domain kind of getting pulled from under them. So they were called carpetbaggers. And I always think about, like, this is a good time to assess that fine line between, that's obviously wrong, that's taking advantage of people. And sometimes that mentality, unfortunately, bleeds into entrepreneurship, where everything's about, every moment is an opportunity. So I think it's good that we're talking about this and acknowledging that. Now, to acknowledge the entrepreneur side of it, one of the jobs of the entrepreneur is to assume there are black swans in your future. That there will be events you cannot predict and they're out of your control. That's what a black swan is.
Say
I think what
say it one more time. Explain what a black swan is, because this was new to me the other day when you were telling me
Oh,
about
okay. So this isn't something I made up. Actually, I got it from Nassim Taleb. He's it's hard to describe what he is. I guess he's like a kind of a true philosopher, economist, professor. I think he was, and I think he still is a professor at NYU. Really fascinating guy, but he wrote a bunch of books, and I think, yeah, I'm gonna have to fact check some of this, but the book might be called Black Swan, or it may be in his book Anti-Fragile, where either way he talks about something what he calls a black swan event, and that is anything that is unpredictable and out of your control. So if you were just some regular guy who was investing in the stock market and it was booming through the 90s and into the early 2000s, well, you might have had a blip with the dot-com crash, but that wasn't really impacting the overall market as much as the 2008 financial crisis affected the entire market. That was a black swan event. 9/11 was a black swan event. And they're all through history. They always happen. Knowing when they'll happen, how they'll happen, you don't know. So all you can do is assume in your strategy there will for sure be black swan events. And so I think this will be an interesting time for entrepreneurs. I think it's gonna wash a ton of people out. And that's what black swan events do. They sort of purify the market, maybe, in a way. Or purify is the wrong word, decimate the market. And then all you're going to have left are, in one case, you're going to have the people who have prepared for this and are just that dedicated. Like, no matter what, they're going to be an entrepreneur. They're going to be a business person. They're going to find a way through. Also, I think on the negative side, you're going to see likely, I shouldn't be making predictions. I don't know anything. But it seems like reasonable to think that big companies like Google and Amazon and Facebook are actually just going to get bigger because they're actually the ones who are insulated from a shock like this.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair, and I think I don't think you should be foolish to think that that's not going to happen, right? I mean, any of the smaller competitors that are on their way up, when you got the big guys on top, and this is just going to knock them down, which puts that gap, bigger. So
that's right, the gap.
I think the gap is definitely something to acknowledge for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess what also I'm just trying to get a little bit to the positivity of the fact is in every black swan event, even when it's in a black swan event, I think would be bad for most people. For some people, it's a big opportunity.
Sure.
And some of that opportunity, or who that opportunity applies to, does have to do with your perspective, your mindset, and ability to keep your thinking as clear as possible while everybody else is losing it.
We were talking about the opportunity and that balance. One thing that we were going to talk about, or I think we're going to talk about, is as the little guy, as the entrepreneur, or just the day-to-day, what do we do and how do we do it? Right? So what can I do? I'm the little guy, right? Like, I own a little tiny crepe shop, right? Yes, I'm an entrepreneur. Yes, I have a business. It was doing great. We were like projected to just be through the roof this year. And then bam, this happened. But I look back and I'm like, okay, last year we had Snowmageddon. For us, it was like biggest snow year in decades, and it just completely wiped us out. And I watched several restaurants close to that, and we made it through that, right? And so it's like, okay, so I think it's fair to assume that there's always going to be something that's going to happen, right? Like, so with that being said, as the little guy, what's the biggest thing that I can do? And I think two things. Number one, is staying as positive as possible. I think you can be realistic, but you can still be positive. And two, right now, this is all about, I think, really, pouring into other people, because there's a lot of scared people. There's a lot of need. There's a lot of uncertainty. And I think that right now for me, my big focus is, okay, I have 2 or 3 people directly in my life that I see every day I'm working with, because I'm still working. I was at the bank earlier today. I'm seeing those people. And so how do I best encourage them? Because I'm still seeing a lot of people. And that's what I'm going to focus on is, okay, I still get to talk to a lot of people. And so I have a big responsibility to try to keep people as positive as possible, at least when they're around me. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting, because it's almost kind of ironic that one of the main things to do is to pour into other people. I heard somebody else say this is a time that will test our trust in each other, more than anything.
Sure.
So yeah, it's interesting that it's hard to ignore the apocalyptic or zombie references, but when the virus spreads from human to human, every human becomes a threat. And so that's like this real existential crisis that I think on the front end, on the surface, that's what we all were dealing with right away when this really became a thing. We're like, oh no, this is a big problem. Now that we're into it, we're like, trying to figure out, how do you keep your head on straight and find ways to connect with people. It doesn't have to be in real life, IRL.
Well, and I think this is a great example. I'm seeing a lot of people find new ways to be creative. I don't know if it was yours or your wife's story that I saw the other day, but taking time to do these projects together that you hadn't been able to do together. If you're in a home with somebody else, right, and like reconnecting with that group of people that you're confined with, I think is huge. And then finding these new creative outlets to be able to connect to people. I love a lot of the stuff that is going on right now. Sorry, just a second. I apologize.
Yeah, you're fine. We can edit. Not wearing any pants?
It's all business up top, man.
Yeah, I like the tie. I haven't had a chance to comment on that. wait, hold it up again. Is it like super long on the bottom part?
Maybe.
This is great. That's good. Oh man.
All right, yeah. Nobody's called me all day, and all of a sudden my phone's blowing up. So.
Yeah, all good.
No, anyway, I think back to this. I think that those creative outlets, and I think one thing that Gary Vee said that I did agree with was he was talking specifically about restaurants, and restaurants it's a luxury, right? I mean, my business is a luxury. Nobody needs crepes and coffee to survive. I mean, it's my business, and I would like to say, yes, you're going to die without my coffee and crepes. But the reality of it is the majority of what we do in America is very privileged. I hate to use those words, but it's a lot of luxuries.
Yeah.
Being able to drive down and just meet somebody at a coffee shop. And I'm hoping when this is all over, people will see that and be like, wow, we were really blessed and didn't realize we were taking so much for granted. Like right now, I mean, it's hard. I'm a touchy-feely guy, and I'm very much into wanting to know who you are and to connect you and connect with you, and that's the whole model of my restaurant. And we can't do that right now, and that's hard. And so I'm hoping that people will, as this becomes, hopefully this is not the new normal. As this moves forward, and we move through it, I hope that people will start realizing just how blessed we were as people, and then take more time to get out and connect again. Not taking some of those relationships for granted.
Like, share, review, and subscribe to this podcast.